Welcome to another exciting episode of Humanity 8.0, a podcast where we talk about our post-truth present and our transhuman future, with the aim of sketching out the outlines of what awaits us in the years and the decades ahead of us. This podcast is brought to you by Rocos. Companies with limited IT budgets and personnel can now get the same cybersecurity protection as big enterprises. Rocos' Secure Access Service Edge, SASE solution, with zero trust, provides enterprise-grade comprehensive cybersecurity so that you can focus on your business. For more, please visit www.rocos.com. That's ROQOS.com. And now, here's your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo.
David, Elliot Berman, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Humanity 8.0.
Thanks so much for having me.
Wonderful. So as we were chatting, you and I have an affinity for Philly, the city. And so in addition to that, what I found attractive about you as a person to interview is the fact that you have background in, let's call it, the real world. You have done work outside of academia, right? And somebody who's a thinker, a researcher, but also somebody who has gone and bumped into the obstacles of doing things, in the wild. Let's call it that. I think that kind of a person I seek, and I'll always learn something interesting from them. And I'm hoping, I know the audience will learn quite a bit from you. So just for, how did I get to discover you? Through an article that you published on Tech Policy Press. When was that? It was maybe a couple of months ago. It was in April.
Yeah, April.
It was in April, and you published it with Professor Victor Picard.
Yes.
Right. And you are right now a postdoc in UPenn, right?
Yes, at the Media Inequality and Change Center at the University of Pennsylvania. That is correct.
Wonderful. Okay. And the topic of that article was another internet is possible. And I think it really is very topical given all the things that are happening right now. But before we go there, I just want to get you to maybe tell us about the work you've done. Looking at your LinkedIn. And so I think the very first thing you did after the master's, maybe, or
before grad. Yeah,
right?
I did master's and PhD in one go through.
One go through. Okay, is being part of, you were an intern, right, at Gerald Nadler's office. Is that
way
true?
back when I was an undergrad at NYU? I did intern there for one summer.
Wonderful. Yeah, and then after that, you were director of new media. Is that right?
That is correct. I was director of new media for an organization that was called the Agenda Project, which was a progressive communications and media firm that was based in New York City and Washington, D.C. We did all kinds of interesting, innovative new media campaigns, producing some viral videos, also like a whole lot of not viral videos that I like to think that my success rate was halfway decent. So in that kind of experience, I kind of learned the ins and the outs of the big platforms, particularly Facebook and YouTube. Got a very intimate understanding of the mechanics of these platforms in a very applied way, why things go viral, how to get things to accord with these algorithms, the influence that these algorithms have over the production and circulation of media texts. So that kind of real world experience definitely informed my work going forward.
Yeah, wonderful. That was just about, I think Obama was the first one. Let's call that campaign was the first one to invest heavily in, let's call it, new media, right? Social media, 2008 campaign, I believe, right? And you were doing your work around 2010 or 12, right? 10, 12. 4 years is a long time, so it matured quite a bit, right? Both in terms of the size of the audience, in terms of the tools, and so forth. So I think that was a very crucial moment, right? When you were probably one of the the first wave of folks who were really moving the needle, I'd say, right? Using that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at that point, lots of people, when they talked about virality, they associated that term with being haphazard, as in having no control. Why do
Mm.
things go viral on the internet? Who knows? Who knows why you get sick from this or that virus? Who knows why this content got 2 million views and this one got 200? But kind of right in that experience, I understood these are big, complex platforms where you can't for sure program or engineer something to 100% go viral on the internet. There is an element of unpredictability there for sure, but there are kind of best practices that could be had if you have a kind of very applied understanding of these platforms through which you can up your chances of getting things to go viral. So this is a kind of point in time in which we understood that we can think about things like data science as a way to discipline media production, to get things to accord with Facebook and Google's algorithm.
Okay. Yeah, I mean myself, whenever I have experienced like virality of one of my tweets, and then when I say virality, it's just very relative, right? Compared to getting like 10, I get 200, right?
Sure.
Always a complete mystery to me, like why it happened, right? Um, so if you would, so I'm very curious about the what like the big, again, can't be guaranteed, obviously, but what are the big sort of best practices, two or three, that if you want to increase the chances of your content to go viral, what would you need to do?
So that's an interesting question. So this is kind of outdated best practices. These are things I learned in 2012, 13, 14, and
Fair
we live in
enough.
a very different, more competitive
Yeah.
platform landscape today than we did then. But lots of the things had to do with how you presented the content, had to do with things like titling, had to do with things like thumbnail images on Facebook and YouTube. Really, again, I was working for a small kind of startup organization. There were maybe 10 employees. I was really looking at BuzzFeed and Upworthy and what they were doing at the time to get things to go viral. And there were lots of kind of data testing, lots of A/B testing that was going on to determine whether that headline is going to get more clicks than the other one, whether this kind of content is going to generate more shares on Facebook than another one. So really presentation was a big focus, but also beyond the question of getting people to click on an article or a video, you wanted to get people to stay with the content for a long time.
Yeah.
And that's a lot harder. It's kind of easy to figure out which titles are going to perform well, to figure out what's going to get somebody to dedicate 2-3 minutes of their time in a very competitive social media landscape is a lot harder to do. So that is an area where I think there's been a lot of innovation that exceeds my own understanding of how things are made to go viral. But that's kind of the types of things I was thinking about back then.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. So let's see here. So let's go, let's tackle the main topic that I wanted to engage you on, which is the internet as it exists today. And you and I have seen it evolve. Let's call it evolve or change. Not necessarily for the better. I would say myself, since I've been living in this internet world since, when it started in 1998, when it became something, right? And I think back then we did not think that it would go this way at all. We thought it was going to be a lot more democratic. The enthusiasm back then was, I mean, it was so innocent looking back, right? We didn't think that there was going to be concentration of power. We just thought it was going to be this wild place, wild in a good sense, right? Where innovation, where the best will win, right? And so from my perspective, at the very high level, that's sort of the sentiment that I have is disappointment, that we are where we are now with I mean, 20 years, what kind of things have we done with all that money and all that knowledge? We have Facebook, and we have Twitter,
Yeah.
We have, I mean, it's pathetic to be honest with you. That's my feeling, right? So what do
Mhm.
you stand at this point? I mean, your article sort of echoes, and that's why it resonated with me, some of that. But let's start with what is wrong with the internet today at a high level. What are the big things that are wrong with it, so that we can envision perhaps where we want to go. Let's start maybe where we are. What's wrong with it, in your opinion, at the high
So
level?
the fundamental problem facing us is that the internet is, um, generally speaking, a commercially run for-profit enterprise, and that the profit interests of the internet's owners are at direct odds with the public's interest in an open, empowering internet. This, to me, is the core, systemic, fundamental problem that I think is behind much of what is wrong with the internet today, from the circulation of mis and disinformation on Facebook, to the amplification of hate speech on Twitter, to the high cost of internet access for consumers. All of these, I think, stem from the fact that the internet is a for-profit enterprise, first and foremost. The second thing that I would say is there is a substantial lack of regulation over the tech behemoths that we have today, from Facebook to Google to Comcast to Amazon. And that's because for much of the last 20 years, Silicon Valley operated in a period of regulatory exceptionalism, in which Silicon Valley was said to not need the same level of oversight that we would expect in other industries, like in telecom, like in the regulation of pharmaceuticals. And again, to your point earlier on, it's largely because of the kinds of technological utopian attitudes that we had towards the internet in general, social media in particular. We thought that, particularly policymakers thought that social media tools like Facebook were going to revolutionize society. They were going to help overthrow dictators and authoritarian governments abroad. They were going to, at home, create new opportunities for political participation. And in economics, they were going to level economic hierarchies and create new kinds of ways of participating in the economy and create the 21st century jobs that we needed to compete in a global world. Obviously, these things have not proven to be true for the most part, but that was the prevailing attitude. So when it came to regulation, for policymakers, what justification was there for regulating Facebook or Google in a substantial way? They did all these things which were seen as manifestly good things. And if they were to pursue these kind of regulations, they're more likely to screw them up than to improve them. There was also this kind of like this fealty that many regulators had, policymakers had, with regards to Silicon Valley. They would bring, tech executives into DC, and the executives would explain how their algorithms work, their business models, how they used and digested data. And they look at that and they say, well, I can't even begin to understand how these things work, let alone regulate it. So I think that lack of regulation is the second big thing. And the final thing that I would say that is chiefly wrong with the internet as it exists today, again, I think it's downstream from that fundamental core battle between the corporate interest and the public interests. But it is the way that social media platforms and search engines, particularly Facebook and Google, have basically swallowed up journalism and spit it out whole. Throughout the 2010s, Facebook and Google became this kind of duopoly in the market for digital ads, and undermined the business model of many news publishers. And we saw between, I think, 2008 and the present, something like a 60% reduction in newsroom staff across the country. And we saw local newsrooms in particular wiped out, closing, reducing staff. And it's not all because of Facebook and Google. Some of it predates it, but they are big, big factors. And of course, for The publishers that survive, they are at the mercy now of these algorithms. They are constantly thinking about if their content is going to be consistent with these algorithms, if their content is going to be favored by these algorithms. And that's a problem because what these algorithms want, what Facebook and Google's algorithms want, is not necessarily what is good for us as a democracy. So those, I think, would be the three maybe main things that I think are problematic in today's environment.
Okay. Yep. Makes sense. So you mentioned the profit incentive, right?
Mhm.
That sort of is behind, or is the driving mechanism, right? That basically results in all of this. But is it the profit? You call it the profit interest, right? What's the expression you use? The profit interest, right?
Profit interest?
Yeah.
Okay.
As opposed to public interest, right? Let's just have the profit interest is meaning there's a company and their bottom line, and because it's a corporation, they need to, spend less than they bring in. Okay. So is it that, or is it the fact that it's a structured, it's a capitalist in the following sense, that a small number of people, right, are deciding what to do with the company, right? And they call the shots, and they have folks that need to keep happy, the investors and the shareholders and so forth, and they look at quarter by quarter, right? And the input from the employees and the input from the customers and all that is almost just negligible if it exists at all, right? Is it the profit interest, or is it something else, or is it the control by a few? Meaning, if let's say if Facebook were a co-op, let's just go wild and imagine that. If it was a co-op, right? I mean, the employees as a whole, all the employees across the board have a say, have a real say, and they also have ownership, and they also benefit from the profits, and they decide what happens to the profits, right? As opposed to Mark Zuckerberg and a handful of people who decide on what to do. Living in a bubble, right? Those guys live in a bubble, and so they make decisions that have to do with their little world, right? Do you think, and the co-op would still have the profit interest, right? So you think it's the profit interest, or is it just the control of the means of production, if I may use it in those terms, by a very, very small number of folks?
So cooperatives are interesting, right? I wouldn't say that they are purely a market actor in the way that we would think of a corporation. They might all be interested in their bottom line and ensuring that they are running sustainable businesses.
Right.
But a cooperative's interests are a lot different, right? They are not trying to siphon off profits to large institutional shareholders like Goldman Sachs. They are not trying to appease VCs for the most part. So they both might be non-public actors for sure, but they have radically different business models.
Right.
I think the profit motive, when we're talking about the big unaccountable corporations, really is at the heart of it all. And that's overriding, I think, questions of market size, overriding questions of whether a company is big or small. I think that is the fundamental thing, is ownership.
Ownership, yeah, yeah. So when you say profit motive, you're talking about that arrangement where, right, you have these investors and you have these folks who are controlling these small number of executives. That's what you mean by profit motive, as opposed to a co-op, which is also a corporation and is also seeking profit, but not exclusively, right? That's the key thing, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And they probably think long term, and the inputs is far more, democratic, because capitalist corporations are, basically dictatorships, right? They're top down. There's the boss, who's the god, and there's everybody else, and who there's demigods, and so on and so forth. And everybody has a boss across the board, and decisions are made by a few. Anyway, I just wanted to sort of tease out so that people don't think that just because there's a group of people are trying to make money and survive and make profit and so forth, but the decision making is spread out and democratic, that's, I didn't want to have folks confuse that with what you're talking about, which is, your typical corporation, the way Amazon works and the way those folks are like, Facebook and Google and all that. And Apple.
We should not conflate the interest of somebody who's maybe working for a ride sharing co-op and maybe as a driver making $50,000-$60,000 a year with the incentives of the CEOs of big tech.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And some startups, I'm seeing some startups are trying very hard, right, to be co-op. And usually a startup starts with that feeling, right? As soon as the VCs come in, it just changes its nature completely. And and if you want to survive, you want to play the game. So this is where we are, and you cited the three sort of the big things that are, let's call it, wrong about where we are today. Now let's jump to, I don't know, 10, 20 years from now, where things are as they should be. Let's say we are lucky and we got to that point by some miracle. Let's describe that state, if you could, and then maybe the next iteration of our conversation would be, well, how do we get there, if we can get there, and what does it take to get from here to there?
Yeah, so I think this kind of future internet is one that there is greater amounts of democratic control over the platforms and infrastructures at the center of our digital lives. It is about privileging public needs over commercial imperatives. And it means understanding that the digital world that we currently occupy in 2023 is one in which the technologies that are invested in, the ways that these technologies are programmed, are in accord with the large corporations that own the technologies rather than the interest of us as a society. So a more democratic internet, which is what I would hope that we have in 10, 20 years and that kind of time horizon, is one where there's greater public ownership and oversight of the internet at all kind of layers within the tech stack. From the pipes that connect us to the internet, to the platforms that we use to connect with our friends on social media, for example.
Okay, give me just help me visualize that concretely, right?
Yeah.
Let's say, so like, having ownership or having a say in the pipeline. Give me a sense of what does that mean concretely that I can relate to.
Sure, absolutely. So part of this is theoretical. Part of it is a little bit speculative, for sure. But in the case of internet service and how that could be provided in a more democratic way, there are actual germinations of what this could look like in existence already. Across the country, there's something like 900 cities that have taken it upon themselves to build their own internet infrastructure. Many of these are democratically administrated as well. So in concrete terms, for example, Chattanooga, Tennessee, 2009, I believe. They, like many other cities, were frustrated with the ways that the big incumbents were providing internet service to them, Verizon and AT&T. And instead of doing the usual thing that many municipal legislators do, which is write a sternly worded letter to them, conduct an investigation, which doesn't have any kind of teeth, they said, you know what, screw it, we're going to create our own internet infrastructure that is owned and operated by the city here in Chattanooga. And they did so through their electric utility, EPB, and it's worked out remarkably well. They've connected every residence, every business within the city limits, and the fastest residential internet that you can get anywhere, not just in the United States, the entirety of the Western Hemisphere is in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And that is because they privileged the public interest, the interest of the residents of the city, rather than the interests of the big ISPs. They took the infrastructure and they put it into their own hands. So yeah, and I'm currently doing some field work in Philadelphia, where there's not that kind of municipal broadband. We have actually a state law which prevents these kind of initiatives, unfortunately. But there is kind of local neighborhood broadbands through an organization that is called Philly Community Wireless, where there are mesh networks in North Philadelphia, an area which has been digitally redlined, where the big incumbents, particularly Comcast, have decided to underinvest in these neighborhoods because they're lower income neighborhoods. And here, through PCW, Philly Community Wireless Internet is being provided for free rather than through Comcast, for example. So at the level of internet infrastructure, that's kind of the vision that I'm talking about. And you obviously hope to scale up from there. Certainly, in terms of how do we get there as to tackling that question, getting this, expanding this mode of getting the internet, of public broadband, it's going to be very hard to do city by city, municipality by municipality, in large part because the big telecom giants love to come into these small towns that are thinking about doing municipal broadband and lobbying against it, pouring tons of money into it. It's a lot easier if it's done at a larger scale, if the struggle for public broadband is not just, in small town by small town, but is part of a broader movement to democratize the internet. So I think these are struggles that we could look at as instructive, that we can look at as ways that the internet that we have is not preordained, but as things that we have to think about in terms of politically, in terms of getting it actually done. How do we scale up these kind of things? And they're going to require much broader scope of coordination and organizing.
Yeah, wonderful. So state law prevents you from doing what Chattanooga did in Pennsylvania. Is that true?
It's true. So it's not just in Pennsylvania. It's about 20 states across the country. I think maybe there was one that just undid it, where the state legislatures put forward laws which either prevented outright municipal broadband or created conditions that were so onerous that it basically prevented municipal broadband build out. And this in Pennsylvania goes back to the mid-2000s, when Philly was thinking about, before Chattanooga, building its own municipal broadband network, which was bitterly opposed by the telecom companies here in Pennsylvania. And through a lot of lobbying, a lot of donations here in Pennsylvania with Governor Ed Rendell at the time, a law was passed which effectively banned the build out of further municipal broadband in the state and really kneecapped the municipal broadband project here in Philadelphia.
Okay, and on what basis, on what legal basis was the legislation, passed? What was the surface argument? We understand what's going on behind the scenes. What is the sort of the text that says you cannot do this because what? Public safety? What is it? What did they say?
So the reason was, there are a couple of different reasons against municipal broadband. I don't obviously put much stock into these, but they are out there. The first is that it inhibits innovation. It by putting in public money into a market that is otherwise characterized by private enterprise, you are crowding out potential private investment in the future. By creating a climate where it's uncertain whether telecoms are going to be able to get a significant profit if they're worried about encroachment of public alternatives. The second thing is that the argument that has been levied against municipal broadband is that it is actually not efficient or effective, that it oftentimes costs a lot of money, and there's maybe some kind of cherry picking of individual case studies where it hasn't worked in a particular instance for a particular reason, which are then kind of universalized and said, aha, public build out of broadband is inefficient. This is not something that governments can do. This is something that should be left to the private sector. And there is a kernel of truth there with regard to the question of scale. If a small town is going to build out a municipal broadband network, there are all kinds of upfront costs that make it oftentimes very prohibitive. They have to have the expertise. They have to be able to have folks who know how to manage a network. All of these things that, if you have the scale of the Comcast and Verizon, they do have those kind of economies of scale. But nevertheless, these municipal broadband initiatives generally perform far better than for-profit ones.
Right, right. But if the budget, if the money that's forked out for, implementing is coming not from the state, but from, the municipality or the town, if that's the case, right? What's business is it? I mean, that argument becomes moot, doesn't it? At least that point. I mean, hey,
It does.
all right.
Yeah.
And so can this law be challenged by, I don't know, what do you call it? What do you call those propositions that are very popular in California? What do you call those? Like you, so, you
talking about, but I'm blanking on the name.
right, right. So like, okay, we put it on the ballot, strike the law, right? And the people decide to strike the law, right? Is that something? I know probably I'm pushing the envelope in terms of your legal expertise and all these things, but or maybe not. Is that possible? Because it seems to be something that, if it can be done, and there's awareness behind it, and people, and people, because there's frustration with, with the internet provider. In every place that I've gone to, there is this monopoly, and they do as they please, and they'll ask you still, as if it was 1982, please stay at home because you'll be there from the hours of 8 and 4. Maybe we'll show up, right?
Sure.
So there is like visceral hatred almost, right, for your provider. And so that there is, I think, potential reception to somebody who says, there's another way. And here are examples, and people get inspired. It's just that, there's the movement is not there yet in terms of getting the consciousness of the folks to the level where they would, for example, back a proposition, I guess that's what the name is, proposition that would, that would either bypass the state, says, we want to do this, screw you, right? And if you challenge us, we take you to court and whatever. But tell me about how much of a push has there been to sort of look for these loopholes or be creative in terms of just, getting over these, you said 20 states, right? These limitations that are clearly to the benefit of private interests that are nearly almost monopolies, which is ironic because, your first point was like competition. What competition is there today?
Yeah, for all the talk about competition, certainly the Comcast and Verizons of the world do not like competition when it comes to the provision of internet service by public entities.
You've been listening to Humanity 8.0 with your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo. Brought to you by Rokos. Thanks for listening.